Okay, basically, if we want to define resettlement, we can just say the following. It is the careful selection and transfer of refugees who requires resettlement from an asylum country, a state in which they have sought protection. Here we're talking about Malaysia in our context, to another state that has agreed to admit them as refugees, and the status provided ultimately grants them permanent residency in the resettlement country. It also carries in the long run with it the opportunity to eventually become a citizen of that country. In simple, appealing way, it offers refugees the opportunity for a fresh start in a safe and stable environment with an access to education, healthcare, and employment. But also don't forget that resettlement countries will benefit from the skills and the contributions of resettled refugees to their communities. So for order for you to be considered for resettlement, there are preconditions. So only those who are determined to be refugees have undergone the refugee status determination process and were recognized as refugee, and I'm saying recognized as a refugee, underline this please, can be considered for resettlement, but still they have to be identified according to precise criteria established by resettlement country. Some will say, what does this mean? It means that registering or being recognized as a refugee alone doesn't mean an individual will be referred for resettlement automatically. UNHCR registered refugees and assesses if they need protection. However, being registered or recognized as a refugee doesn't mean that you will be identified for resettlement. Because resettlement is identified as a solution for the most vulnerable refugees who are facing severe risk or challenges, as well as they need to meet the criteria set out by the resettlement countries. So it's not only being recognized as a refugee. There are more than one condition for the case to be identified and considered for a settlement. To make it more simplified, we can say that selection for a settlement is based on refugee needs and suitability upon resettlement countries. So there's two conditions now. In addition to that, the submission of a case for a settlement considers the severity of the individual needs in the country of asylum and the availability of places and criteria set by the resettlement country. Having said that, it's important to remember that the decision on whether to accept refugees rests solely with the resettlement country, which means UNHCR can't force a country to accept refugees. Moreover, one cannot apply or request for a settlement. So if a refugee who's recognized as a refugee or registered with UNHCR, can he apply for a settlement? No. Can he request for a settlement? No. What does this mean? It means that UNHCR is mainly responsible for identifying vulnerable cases that requires resettlement consideration. How we identify this? We receive referrals for highly vulnerable refugees from partners. We identify cases through our database where refugees share their vulnerabilities during the interviews with UNHCR. And refugees who are identified as potential candidates for resettlement undergo a thorough assessment and process to determine their eligibility and suitability for resettlement. We will demonstrate the resettlement process and the steps in the following slides. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yes, thank you. So looking at the graph here, what you see, you can realize that the resettlement is only available for a small fraction of the world's refugee in need of this solution. If I can say it, worldwide, less than 1% of refugees are ever resettled. There are far less resettlement spaces than the number of refugees that need resettlement. So it's important to note the following. One, resettlement is not a right. What does this mean? It means that registration or being recognized as a refugee with UNHCR doesn't mean the individual will be referred for resettlement. Otherwise, you would have seen all the individuals holding the refugee status have been resettled, which is not the case at all. Why? As I mentioned before, we have limited spaces. We have limited slots compared to the numbers of refugees in high need of resettlement. Therefore, resettlement can be considered as a unique solution that remains a protection tool for a limited fraction of refugees who are highly vulnerable. And the identification for these potential cases is based on individual protection needs. For cases to be processed for resettlement, as I mentioned, refugees must fulfill the conditions. Recognized as a refugee, one, meet the criteria or more of UNHCR submission category, as you see in the slide in front of you. And the specific conditions and criteria, besides meeting the criteria, one of the 7 criteria or more, and recognized as a refugee, he needs to meet as well the criteria set out by the resettlement country. They have their own stipulation and conditions in which profile to be considered for resettlement. There's 7 submission categories that we will go through. And these 7 submission categories that you will see now applied by all UNHCR operations. Why? To ensure a coherent, consistent, and transparent approach for the identification and processing of resettlement cases. You may say, I'm like, okay, why this information? Because it helps to first and foremost manage expectation on resettlement. We hope that reduce some of the frustration and the aggression among refugees. Also, with this information to be conveyed, it will help deter refugees from moving from their first country of asylum. For example, they sought asylum in Thailand, and they want to come to Malaysia because they hear that Malaysia, the resettlement in Malaysia is easier. So the answer is no. It is consistent across all UNHCR operations. There's no operation or country where resettlement is easier than other countries. For the submissions and the details, please, can you move to the next slide, Mary? And also, can you react? I'm seeing some reactions, but can you react just to see if you all still with me? Okay. Thank you. Okay. For cases to undergo processing for resettlement, I will repeat again, it must meet 2 conditions. First, over again, you must be recognized as a refugee through the RSD process by UNHCR. And second, it must meet the criteria of 1 or more of the resettlement submission categories that you're seeing now. In addition, it should meet the specific criteria outlined by the resettlement country. I will just go through each and every resettlement submission category and briefly introduce them, okay? So the first one is legal and physical protection need. Can you just go back? Because I'm like, it's on the, can you go back on, yeah, legal and physical protection need. What does this mean? It means that when refugees facing immediate or long-term danger of being sent back to their home countries where they could be harmed, they might also face the risk of being arrested, detained, or put in prison for no good reason. There may be a threat to their safety or basic human rights in the country they're seeking refugee in. We're talking here about Malaysia, making it impossible for them to stay here. Women's and girls' interest. What does this mean? It means that these kind of category where women and girls faces precarious security or physical protection threat as a result of their gender. So being a female is the cause of what they're going through. And they have specific needs arising from past persecution, trauma, where they face severe hardship resulting in exposure to exploitation, abuses, lack access to traditional or alternative support and protection mechanisms. And this kind of risk can be experienced in the country of asylum or in the country of origin. Third, survivor violence and torture. What does it mean? It means when refugees have experienced torture or violence or kind of abuse, either in the country of asylum or in the country of origin, it's in their home country, still be affected by what they've encountered, even if there's no obvious signs for it. They could be at risk of more trauma or harm because of their situation in the country of asylum, or if they go back home. They might need or they might be in need of medical or mental health care that's not available to them or accessible. So resettlement could be a necessary solution to help them meeting their specific needs in the resettlement country. 4, medical conditions. What do you mean by medical needs? It's when the health or the condition or the disability is life-threatening. When refugees are encountering this without proper treatment, it could lead to life-threatening issues, right? But we need to look at further on that. Treatment also is not available for that medical need or medical condition, or not accessible in Malaysia. And without treatment or with the treatment, it could improve the health condition or the quality of their life. But in order to consider a case under the medical needs category, we need to look at many factors. 1, the diagnosis. Is it life-threatening? Could it cause irreversible loss of function or obstacles to normal life if it's not treated? Also, we look at the treatment. Is it available? Is it accessible in the country of asylum? We're talking here about Malaysia. And finally, we look at the prognosis. It should be favorable. The prognosis, the treatment will help the refugee or the one who's dealing with this medical issue to get cured. However, to be honest with you, the resettlements of persons with medical needs is considered very challenging to UNHCR. And the resettlement slots are very limited. Refugees to be considered by UNHCR for resettlement under this category are to be assessed individually and carefully, where medical reports and supporting documents are there and coming from a certified doctor. So it's a must to have a supporting documents to their medical needs. Also, you may ask why resettlement countries just don't offer more places for medical needs cases. We'll say resettlement countries would provide the utmost support for refugees, including medical services. Their health facilities have also limited capacity to absorb all the many new arrivals, including refugees that present medical needs. And that's why they offered limited slots for that. Additionally, some treatments are expensive. And as you know, the pressure of medical services is becoming higher nowadays. Also keep in mind that they also need to meet their citizens' needs, which is their priority. Can we go to the next slide, Mary? Okay, children and adolescents at risk. What does it mean? What kind of profile we're looking at? So it means all those below the age of 18 years. To be a child, you need to be under 18. And who are at heightened risk as a result of exposure to risk resulting from individual circumstances. Children at risk category can include a lot of cases and scenarios, like unaccompanied and separated children. Children at risk have experienced violence, exploitation, abuse, or any form of abuse or neglect. Children in detention without having any kind of effective support in the country of asylum. Children who suffers from bullying and social discrimination, which just affect their psychological well-being. Children with physical disabilities where they can't attend proper schools. There's a non-exhaustive list of cases and scenarios of this category. So if I can just wrap up, what does it mean? It means that children who have compelling protection needs, which are not addressed in the country of asylum, and resettlement has been determined to be the most appropriate solution for them. Number 6, restoring family unity, or what we know as family unification. What we're talking about is the chance to reunite refugees with their nuclear family members that are already in resettlement state. But is it applicable for everyone? No. In order for this to be applicable, all other options to reunite turn to be ineffective and is not attainable through other pathways. What does this mean? It means that if someone is in the resettlement country and he needs to reunite with his family, he has to initiate or lodge a family reunification application from the country of resettlement. Also, it could be through sponsorship pathways, which is UNHCR doesn't involve in these things. The one in the resettlement country, the family member in the resettlement country should initiate this. Last but not least, number 7, lack of foreseeable alternative durable solution. What it means. To explain this simply, I came up with this information. Since there is no opportunity for refugees to settle down in Malaysia or go home voluntarily, resettlement could be considered as only lasting solution for them. Even though this seems to apply to all refugees in Malaysia, it can't serve as a sole criteria. So you can't say, okay, I fit through this submission category, lack of foreseeable alternative durable solution. It doesn't stand alone. Okay? For the 7th submission category, if you need further information on that or further explanation, you can find them online. It's very easy to find them online. Okay? Yes. Thank you for the reactions. Okay, next slide, please. Yes. Okay, on this slide, we'll outline the step-by-step process for resettlement through UNHCR. It will cover the identification process, the interview process, and the decision-making. So the process begins with the identification of individuals who present significant protection needs, such as survivor of violence, individuals with serious medical condition, the subcategories that we showed to you just right now. Once a refugee is identified as a potential candidate for resettlement, several factors come into play when to find if they are eligible for resettlement processing or not. First, the desk review and telephone call. If any individual is preliminarily identified as eligible for resettlement, they may be contacted by the Durable Solution Unit for further information. This would occur via telephone. So we will call them to gather additional details necessary to complete the assessment of the individual's eligibility for further resettlement processing. This step, which is the first step, ensures that all the relevant information is gathered and evaluated thoroughly to facilitate an informed decision regarding the individual resettlement prospects. If found eligible and assessments are completed over the phone, the refugee and his concerned family that are registered in the same file will be invited to our resettlement interview. So the second step is the resettlement interview. If refugees are invited for a resettlement interview, in principle, all interviews take place in person at UNHCR office. The UNHCR staff conducting the resettlement interview will brief you about the purpose of this interview and the guidelines. So there's nothing in particular you need to prepare for your RST interview. Only please come to an UNHCR reception center at least 30 minutes before your scheduled appointment. Also, please bring family members who are registered in your UNHCR file and as advised by the staff member who called you. So whenever the resettlement staff member called you for an appointment, he will tell you which family members you will bring to the resettlement interview. For example, your spouse, children, and you need to know that your family members may be interviewed individually, case-by-case basis. Also, don't forget to bring with you your UNHCR documents, any identity documents you have, and any other supporting documents. For example, you have a medical condition and you have a medical report. Please bring the medical report with you. Also, please be prepared to spend 2 to 3 hours and sometimes more at UNHCR reception center. Maybe the interview will take 2 hours, it could be 3, it depends on the complexity and the circumstances and the merits of each and every interview. What happened after the resettlement interview? Your situation and the information that we gathered during this interview will be carefully reviewed, and a decision will be made on whether a submission will be done to a resettlement country for their consideration. So after the resettlement interview, it's either you will be informed that your case has been submitted to a resettlement country, or you will be informed that your case doesn't meet the criteria to be considered further, and you will no longer have any active resettlement file with UNHCR. Once your case is submitted for a resettlement country, the Durable Solutions Unit will contact you to provide you with more information on the country your case has been submitted to. And after submission of the case, the resettlement country ultimately decide whether or not to accept you according to their policies and laws. Now, with the fourth one, if you have been accepted for resettlement, the International Organization for Migration, IOM, organizes necessary pre-departure arrangement, including medical screening, cultural orientation, briefings on what you're expected to do there, as well as the travel arrangement to the resettlement country. Is it clear? Can we move to the next slide? Okay. So just to continue with what we've said, inquiring about your resettlement case, here we're talking about those who underwent resettlement interviews and they were informed that their cases have been submitted to resettlement countries. So if you haven't done any resettlement interview, you're not entitled to contact these addresses or contact numbers or entities, okay? So for example, if a submission has been made to the United States of America and the refugee and his family were informed that your case has been submitted to the USA, you can check your processing status with the Resettlement Support Center, as you can see in this slide. There's an email, there's a phone, there's a fax, okay? So you have different platforms that you can reach out to RSC. If a submission was made to Canada, you can contact Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. if your case has been accepted, so you were contacted by RSC or RRCC, and your case has been accepted, and you've been informed about that, and you have a question about the pre-departure arrangement or your travel, you can contact IOM. So IOM is only if you got accepted. There is an email and contact number that you can reach out to them. Okay? Before we move to this slide, I want also to highlight that if your case has been submitted to a country other than US or Canada, because unlike US and Canada, our vast majority of our submissions are for these countries. The resettlement country, for example, if it's Australia or it's New Zealand, the resettlement country themselves will contact you directly via your phone number or through the email that you provided or shared during the resettlement interviews, if available. If it's not available, please make sure that your contact number, the phone number, is on duty and there's a reception so they can reach out to you. Yes. So now we're going with the don'ts, and really there are key points that we want to convey in this presentation or webinar. Please, please, please don't send letters to UNHCR for a settlement interview request. I've mentioned to you, it's not a right. You can't request. You cannot request for a settlement. Also, wait to be scheduled for a settlement interview. Avoid approaching UNHCR office on a walk-in basis. What does this mean? This means that if you're granted an appointment for a settlement interview, you will be contacted by us and your name will be in the schedule. So whenever you walk into an UNHCR office, you will find your name there. If you haven't been contacted, don't come. It's a waste of money for you. It's a waste of time, and you won't be allowed to enter inside the premises. Also, please avoid submitting emails for the same request, as it will just delay processing. Now, I would like here to share in this slide some important information. One, regarding resettlement activities managed by UNHCR, I need you all to know that activities are conducted through an appointment system, and I've told you this just right now, and I'm re-emphasizing on this information. Two, scheduling for our ST interview is based on high needs and specific criteria set for resettlement countries. This ensures that resources are allocated effectively to those who's in need the most. Three, keep in mind to understand that resettlement is not a right for everybody. It's based on the vulnerability and the specific needs of the individuals. And it's an option only for few refugees. I've told you in the previous slides that we have limited spaces comparing to the people are in need of resettlement. And bear in mind, it's ultimately up to the resettlement country, not to UNHCR, to decide whether to accept refugees or not. The fourth point here, it's a common misconception. Having a refugee card, being recognized as a refugee, doesn't automatically make one eligible for a settlement. It's one of the preconditions. However, it's not the case. Resettlement eligibility is determined by various factors. And I've mentioned this to you before. It's just beyond just having a refugee status. You have to meet one or more of the submission category, settlement submission category, and meet the criteria outlined by the resettlement country. So being recognized as a refugee is not a rule to be considered for resettlement. Lastly, I want to emphasize that the length of stay in Malaysia doesn't automatically make refugees eligible for resettlement. During all my slides, did I mention that the longer you stay in Malaysia, you will be more eligible for resettlement consideration? No. Resettlement decisions are based on individual circumstances and criteria set by the resettlement country. Can we move to the next slide? Okay, attention. It's in red, and we want to draw your attention to this. In this slide, there's some vital and eye-opening information that we need you to make sure that you are aware of. First, please be aware that all services provided by UNHCR and its partners are free of charge. You cannot pay to process your case faster. Don't trust anyone or any organization that asks you to pay for any UNHCR or partner services. Any UNHCR services offered to you in exchange for money are considered scams. Also, you need to know that fraud is a crime under Malaysian law. You can approach the nearest police station to report fraud. Okay? So the question is, can you pay to have a resettlement interview with the UNHCR? The answer for sure, no, you can't. You cannot. All services provided by UNHCR are free of charge. Don't trust anyone or any organization that asks for money to be paid. You will lose your money, you will not get an interview appointment, and if you have been approached by someone that claiming that they can help your case with UNHCR, please inform UNHCR immediately. Also, if you're not sure, if you were contacted by UNHCR or someone else, you can ask UNHCR. You are especially encouraged to do so if you are asked for money or favor. You can send an email or complaint to Riot, which is its UNHCR Risk Integrity and Oversight team, and they will contact you back as required or necessary. You will find the email for them on their website, on Malaysia website. And you can get more information about fraud and type of scam in the Malaysia website as well. Now, we're going to the most excited part, which is the frequently asked question. We do understand that refugees always may have questions, and we're here really to help in answering these questions. The questions you see in this slide are collected from various outreach meetings with refugees, town hall meetings. And I believe during the slides, the previous slides, I tried to address many of these questions, such as you can not apply for a settlement, and the fact that being recognized as a refugee doesn't guarantee resettlement. Also, for example, we often encounter questions regarding polygamies and child marriages. Let me address this briefly. In most countries where refugees are resettled, having more than one spouse or being in polygamy relationship is against the law. This means that if refugees wish to continue a polygamous marriage, they may not be eligible for a settlement. The Durable Solution Unit typically advises families in the resettlement pipeline about their chances of resettlement, and the families must consider what's best for their spouses and children. Also, we often encounter questions about child marriages. Let me address this briefly as well. Similarly to polygamy, getting married as a child is a form of violence against both girls and boys. So if you are married to someone under 18, who's a child, under 18, any individual who's under the age of 18 is a child. You and your spouse might not be able to be resettled to any resettlement country. Is it clear? I believe that I addressed most of the questions presented in this slide. However, there's a question that just came to my mind, and it's about a situation where a family is offered resettlement, but other family members aren't registered, but yet live together. Do they get resettlement? Do they get resettled together? First of all, you need to understand that our main purpose or the utmost goal is to preserve and maintain family unity during the settlement process. We look at each family member's needs individually, considering urgency, the urgency of their situation, and the impact of such separation if they get resettled without the other family member or members. Even if some members aren't registered initially, we might evaluate exceptionally their cases based on their situation and urgency. However, what we want to emphasize is that during the initial phone call with the family that's coming from resettlement, it's important to mention any additional family members and their dependence on them. So if you get a call from a settlement and they are getting more information about who's living with you, I'm like, is he registered or not? Please be honest and forthcoming on that. Because concealing this information could slow down the process or be seen as providing false information. As such, if you have family members who are not registered and highly dependent on you, it's crucial to disclose their dependency when asked by their settlement colleague during their settlement process, mainly in the first stage, the desk review. If you remember the phone call that you will get to gather more information on that. The earlier you mention this, the better to assess the case and see whether resettlement is the best option for this family. Also, I need to emphasize again about our website, which you will see on the next slide. Oh yeah, it's the slide here. It's really a valuable resource, and it offers a wealth of information, including frequently asked questions, where you can find answers to common queries. If you can't find what you need there, our dedicated CBP or community-based protection team will be available and reachable to assist you further by sharing your questions with DSU. And after this webinar, all the relevant inquiries that you've submitted in the Q&A space or chat box will be collected, addressed, and then posted on the frequently asked questions section of the resettlement page on our website. Here we go to the Malaysian website. Can you just go the previous slide? I just have something to say. Yes. So this is the website, and where you can check all the frequently asked questions and information about resettlement. Please visit it, navigate through it, and see what information you might get from it. And as I mentioned to you, we will be reviewing all the questions and comments, feedback you have submitted during this webinar to see what we can do and if we need to update the information on the website on that regard. Next slide. Contacting DSU. Please, before reaching out to DSU, carefully think or contemplate or consider the purpose of your contact. Please avoid contacting DSU unless it's really urgent and absolutely necessary. Also, this is a good thing. It's important to know that our email address is no longer active. So if you send an email to our the DSU mailbox, we're no longer looking at these emails. Only if you already had an interview with the UNHCR for resettlement purposes and you have questions or want updates on your case following the interview, like if your family composition, marital status change, or anything else important, you can contact your respective caseworker, the caseworker that you that have done or conducted the interview with you through the caseworker field form, or through who scheduled you for the resettlement interview, okay? Try not to send the same updates or requests multiple times over WhatsApp, because I'm like, no one has the capacity to go through multiple requests with the same information. It can slow things down. It will be for not your sake, it will be working against you. Also, for those who are not in the resettlement pipeline, please don't contact DSU. The only thing we advise you to do is to make sure that your details and phone numbers are updated through the contact form in Malaysia website, okay? We will not contact you back. We will not call you back if you don't have a resettlement case, if you've never had an interview with resettlement. We don't have the capacity to do that. So please be thoughtful and don't waste your time. If your case is being considered for resettlement and you've been told it's been submitted, also please be patient and rest assured that either the Durable Solution Unit or the resettlement country will contact you to give you more information and updates. It needs some time. The processing from UNHCR to the resettlement country, it needs some time. So please be patient. And again, make sure that your contact number is accessible. There's a connection. It's on use, okay? Also, there's no need to approach the office individually or send emails. I'm just trying to stress this out again, okay? You're just wasting your money. No one will allow you to enter. Last but not least, really thank you so much